Since winter is coming and days are getting shorter and colder, I bet all of us are in desperate need of something hearty and warm to get us ready. I'm talking about those rich, flavorful stews that'll cozy up our hearts for Christmas, just like Grandma always made. Shrimp gumbo is a warm, spicy staple from Louisiana, an unforgettable blend of French, Spanish, and West African influences, topped with that unmistakable Cajun twist. It all begins with a roux, a rich, nutty base of flour and fat, cooked to a deep brown. Here's the trick. The darker the roux, the deeper the flavor, but there's no speeding through this step. It takes patience, a bit of muscle, and a careful watch to get it just right. Once that roux is perfection, in go plump shrimp, smoky sausage, and the Cajun holy trinity, onions, bell peppers, and celery. Add okra for thickness and a hint of earthiness, and then bring on the heat with Cajun spices. Let it all simmer, melding together into a bowl of pure comfort. The finishing touch? Filet powder, a special edition made from dried sassafras leaves, gives the gumbo a gentle, herbal warmth. In Louisiana, gumbo isn't simply a dish, it's a celebration. There's even an annual festival in its honor, showcasing the endless ways families and chefs put their spin on this classic. And one thing's for sure, nobody makes just a little gumbo. Serve it with rice and a crusty piece of French bread to soak up every last drop. And as they say down south, laissez les bon temps rouler. Burgoo may sound like something you would shout in a difficult situation, but this is in fact the everything stew of Kentucky, which has an interesting history. Settlers used whatever ground meat and vegetables were available in their kitchens in the preparation of this dish. If you were a pioneer in the wilderness, that meant wild game. Think squirrel, rabbit, and even raccoon. Most burgoos served today are made from beef, pork, and chicken, cooked with corn, lima beans, okra, and tomatoes. Burgoo is known for its intense, slightly smoky taste and thick, stew-like texture, which can be attained by slow cooking for approximately 24 HRs. Burgoo is taken with utmost seriousness in Kentucky. However, burgoo was the first festival food that was simmered in large kettles over burning coals and was offered to church gatherings, fairs, and political meetings. It was said that a great burgoo could feed a whole town, and today, some places still make it in 100-gallon kettles, stirring with paddle-sized spoons. There is even a Kentucky Burgoo Festival where different cooks prepare and offer out the best-tasting burgoo. As expected by this enduring tradition, no two burgoo recipes are the same. Therefore, if you have never tasted burgoo, get a recipe and allow the stew pot to do its magic. Remember, it will take time. This is not a dinner that you can prepare in the blink of an eye. It is an experience. Brunswick stew is both heartwarming and mysterious. Its true origins are still a matter of debate. Brunswick County, Virginia, and Brunswick County, Georgia, claim to be the birthplace of this tomato-rich stew, which dates back to the 19th century. Regardless of its origin, Brunswick stew has always been about using local, seasonal ingredients and stretching them to feed a crowd. Traditional recipes used wild animals such as squirrels or rabbits, but nowadays chicken and pork are the usual protein pick for this stew. The stew is thickened with crushed tomatoes, chicken, and lima seeds, sometimes adding a little barbecue sauce for an extra smokiness. Long ago, this dish was a communal affair, made in massive pots and often cooked over a wood fire for hours until every ingredient was melt-in-your-mouth tender. In Brunswick, Georgia, there's a 25-gallon cast iron pot that claims to be the original Brunswick stew pot. It's big enough to feed an entire town. Southerners have been known to argue over whose Brunswick stew is best, with each family passing down their own secret recipe. But whether you're making it for a crowd or just stocking up in the freezer, Brunswick stew will fill your kitchen with the scent of comfort and nostalgia. Cioppino is the ultimate coastal comfort food, a steaming bowl of seafood goodness in a tomato and wine broth that practically transports you to the Pacific coast. This Italian-American stew originated with San Francisco's Italian fishermen, who'd throw together whatever the sea offered up that day, whether it was crab, clams, mussels, shrimp, or fish. The magic of Cioppino is in its flexibility. No hard rules here, just a satisfying mix of the freshest seafood around. The base is a flavorful blend of garlic, onions, tomatoes, and wine, simmered down to a rich, aromatic broth. Add in a touch of fennel for sweetness, a sprinkle of fresh basil and some red pepper flakes for heat, and let each piece of seafood cook just until tender. Traditionally, Cioppino is served with a hearty loaf of sourdough bread. After all, no one wants to leave even a drop of that amazing broth behind. And here's a little fun fact for you. The name Cioppino comes from the Italian word ciupan, which means little soup, though there's nothing little about the big, bold flavors in this dish. One spoonful, and you'll feel like you're catching a salty ocean breeze right off the San Francisco docks. Perfect for seafood lovers or anyone wanting to wow with a new recipe, this stew will steal the spotlight. Pair it with a crisp glass of white wine to complete the experience and savor a taste of the California coast. No travel required. Pepperpot stew is also known as the soup that won the war and has lots of spice, history, and tradition as well. Its origins were in the Caribbean, but it was embraced by African, Native, and Creole chefs who came to Philadelphia during the Revolution. It is stated that due to Pepperpot stew, George Washington's soldiers were able to survive the winter they had ahead of them, which makes this dish a part of legends in American cooking. Tripe-based with hefty vegetables and hot peppers as the main ingredient, Pepperpot stew is still spicy and peppery even to this date. This stew is hearty and comforting and really has a full range of flavor profiles with deep, meaty tones complemented by the freshness of hot peppers. Allspice or thyme will give the stew warmth, while potatoes and dumplings make the stew richer and ensure that every drop of the broth is consumed. This food was originally sold on the streets of Philadelphia in the 1800s as pepperpot stew, cooked in steaming carts. It became so popular that even the city of Philadelphia earned the nickname of Pepperpot City. While tripe is not as typical in contemporary renditions, this is a well-liked and distinctive dish. Give it a go to add some historic touch to the winter meals. Pepperpot stew is not just a meal, it is history, put into a bowl, garnished with spices that will give your tongue a good telling off. Every spoonful of Irish lamb stew is like the warm embrace of the Emerald Isle. This signature stew is simple yet soulful. It uses just a few ingredients: lamb, potatoes, onions, and carrots, although it's perfect for a warm winter's night. But the Irish tend to do it year-round, especially on cold and foggy days when you need something hearty to cut through the cold. The star here is, of course, the lamb, which is so tender it's almost melting. But don't overlook the potatoes. They're not just sidekicks. It thickens the soup and gives the stew a smooth texture. During the Great Famine in Ireland, lamb stew was made from almost anything available. And this authentic Irish lamb stew never used any fancy flour or thickeners, just the natural starch of the potatoes, and it was delicious. You'll know it's done when you can't resist the smell. To raise the bar to the next level, add fresh herbs like thyme or parsley, and serve with Irish soda bread to soak up every drop of soup. This stew is as straightforward as it is satisfying, proving that you don't need a lot of ingredients for something truly delicious. It's simple, durable, and just waiting for you to warm it up. Venison stew is a hearty, outdoorsy classic that transforms lean game meat into a warm, comforting meal. Imagine tender chunks of venison simmered in a savory, rich broth alongside carrots, potatoes, onions, and a blend of earthy herbs. Venison's natural, slightly sweet flavor shines in this dish, complemented beautifully by a splash of red wine or dark beer for extra depth. And here's the best part: venison stew is for the adventurers, the hunters, or anyone wanting to shake up their winter dinner routine with something special. Venison isn't your everyday meat. It's low in fat but packed with protein, making it a perfect choice if you want a hearty meal that won't weigh you down. The key to a great venison stew? Letting it cook low and slow to bring out the meat's tender, luxurious texture. Fun fact: in medieval Europe, venison was so prized that only the nobility could legally hunt it, so this stew comes with a touch of gourmet history. Toss in a few juniper berries or bay leaves for a rustic, woodsy note, And don't forget a crusty baguette to soak up every last drop of that rich, flavorful broth. Ideal for sharing around a fire, real or imagined. Venison stew is wholesome, warming, and brings a taste of the wild right to your table. Mulligan stew is typically a leftover dish, and indeed, it is the definition of throwing together everything except for the kitchen sink. It has its roots in the Great Depression when individuals combined all sorts of commodities that were edible in a pot: meat, vegetables, beans, pasta, and anything that could be imagined. Thus, no two Mulligan stews are the same. It is one of the most versatile, or rather, one of the most lenient, dishes to prepare. Mulligan stew is based on what is known as the Hobo stew, in which you subject various ingredients to uncertain fates that result in an amazing stew. The factor that makes Mulligan stew stand out is the fact that it is one of the cheapest meals that can be prepared. Got leftover beef? Toss it in. An extra can of beans? Throw it in too. This consists of potatoes, carrots, onions, tomatoes, some appetizers, and whatever remains in the kitchen. In the Great Depression, massive quantities of Mulligan stew would be cooked in large batches, and everyone would bring something to the kettle. This sharing and utilization of every little component is the essence of Mulligan stew. Oh, no preparations here. Simply use your creativity. To give it a boost, season with a hint of Worcestershire, or alternatively, season with a pinch of paprika. So the next time you find your fridge is almost empty, then maybe it is time to bring out the Depression-era chef in you and try out Mulligan stew. It is the stew equivalent of the Mystery Box Challenge and will surely warm you. Squirrel stew might make you do a double take, but it was once a staple food in rural America, especially in the South. Think of it as the original farm-to-table meal before that term was trendy. Squirrel meat is surprisingly lean, with the flavor somewhere between chicken and rabbit. Plus, it's tender and flavorful when slow-cooked. Pair it with vegetables like carrots, onions, and potatoes. Maybe add a little cider vinegar or a handful of herbs, and you've got a stew like no other. Why squirrel, you ask? During the Great Depression, people turned to this common critter as an easily available source of protein. Squirrels are plentiful and easy to find. Therefore, it was not unusual for Grandma to throw a squirrel into the pot. In fact, some regions still celebrate the tradition, with squirrel stew cook-offs and recipes passed down through generations. Squirrel meat has been shown to have more protein per gram than beef or chicken. Therefore, it is nutritious and unique. If you're game to try this classic, remember that it's all about seasoning. Bay leaves, thyme, and even a little hot sauce can make this stew delicious and memorable. Embrace your pioneering spirit with a bowl of squirrel stew. It is very delicious and extremely nostalgic. Oxtail stew is a true comfort food, perfect for anyone who loves deep, meaty flavors with a luxuriously silky texture. Despite the name, oxtail simply refers to the tail of cattle, rich with collagen and connective tissue, making it perfect for slow-cooked dishes. As it simmers, oxtail transforms, becoming incredibly tender and melt in your mouth, with a broth so thick it's almost like gravy. Loaded up with carrots, potatoes, onions, and warming spices, oxtail stew feels both fancy and wonderfully homey. Enjoyed for centuries around the world, from Jamaican and Caribbean versions to European classics, oxtail has a humble yet flavorful history. And here's a fun fact. In medieval times, oxtail was considered a lesser cut, eaten mostly by peasants. Today, though, it's a delicacy with prices to match. The key to perfect oxtail stew? Patience. This is no quick meal. Slow cooking it for several hours brings out its full, rich flavor while letting the bones add even more depth to the broth. For an extra layer of flavor, try adding a splash of red wine or a dash of soy sauce. Serve with rice, mashed potatoes, or even dumplings to soak up every last drop of the Hearty sauce. For a dish that's both rustic and refined, oxtail stew is a timeless favorite just waiting to be rediscovered in your kitchen. This is a very classic dish that was often prepared by Grandma in winter. Do not be put off by the word rabbit. It's a tender, lean meat with a mild flavor that's often compared to chicken, but with a bit more character. Oh, and by the way, I'm talking about rabbit stew. The meat of rabbit is rich in proteins and comparatively has less fat content than most meats. Now, this stew defines comfort and health altogether. The basic ingredients for rabbit stew are root vegetables such as carrots, potatoes, onions, and mushrooms cooked in a meaty gravy. This dish has deep roots in European cooking, especially in France and Italy, where rabbits were a backyard staple. Fun fact: rabbit meat is probably one of the world's most eco-friendly sources of meat since it needs fewer resources for production than other meats such as beef. To get the best out of your rabbit stew, cook it low and slow, letting the meat fall off the bone and infuse the broth with a rich, gamey flavor. If you're feeling adventurous, pour a few spoonfuls of red wine into the pot, or spice it up with a few twirls of thyme and rosemary. Accompany it with a crusty loaf of bread for the bread-dipping accompaniment, and you've got yourself a stew that's comforting, tangy, and a tad exotic, a real winter favorite that needs a revival. Dilled beef and cabbage stew is the ultimate in comfort food, adding a Scandinavian touch with the fresh, earthy flavor of dill. This hearty dish brings together tender beef chunks, cabbage, carrots, and potatoes, all uplifted by dill's herbaceous brightness. It's surprisingly refreshing for a winter stew, just right when you want something lighter than heavy gravies or sauces. Fun fact: cabbage is not just affordable but packed with vitamins C, K, and fiber, making it one of the healthiest veggies around. This recipe has its roots in Eastern European and Scandinavian kitchens, where cabbage was a winter staple, and Grandma knew it was a meal you could easily whip up from simple ingredients, yet still serve up a satisfying, flavorful dinner. For a little extra zing, add a splash of vinegar or a dollop of sour cream. Serve it with rye bread or boiled potatoes to soak up every drop of that tangy, herby broth. Cozy yet unique, this dilled beef and cabbage stew deserves a comeback as a winter classic. Codfish stew is a beloved New England classic that celebrates the region's abundant seafood. This comforting dish brings together tender, flaky cod fillets in a rich tomato broth, along with hearty chunks of potato, onion, and sometimes a bit of celery or bell pepper for extra depth. The magic of this stew lies in its perfect balance, light but filling, with the sweetness of tomatoes offsetting the subtle ocean taste of the cod. It's the kind of meal that feels just right on a cold winter evening, warming you from the inside out. For generations, New Englanders have relied on cod as a dietary staple. Back when the Atlantic was teeming with fish, cod was so plentiful that it even served as a form of currency in colonial trade. To capture the authentic New England flavor, finish your stew with a sprinkle of fresh parsley and a squeeze of lemon juice. It adds a bright note that ties everything together. Traditionally, it's served with oyster crackers or a hunk of crusty bread, perfect for soaking up every drop of the savory broth. This humble yet flavorful stew is a true coastal treasure. Simple, satisfying, and steeped in history. Sheepherder's stew is a hearty, no-frills dish with its roots in the lives of Basque herders working in the rugged American West. Made with lamb or mutton, potatoes, onions, and often some peas or green beans, it's a stew that's as rustic as it comes. The simplicity of ingredients made it perfect for cooking over a campfire out on the open range, offering a warm and filling meal to fuel those long, chilly days spent with the flock. Lamb lends the stew a deep, earthy flavor, while the vegetables bring sweetness and depth, creating a dish that's straightforward but utterly comforting. Here's a fun tidbit. Basque sheepherders typically used a single pot for all their cooking, making stews like this a practical and satisfying choice. They'd throw in whatever ingredients they had at the moment, letting everything simmer together for a meal that was both home-style and efficient. For an added layer of flavor true to tradition, try a splash of red wine or a pinch of rosemary, or even a handful of barley for extra heartiness. Pair it with some bread or biscuits, and Sheepherder's stew becomes the ultimate one-pot wonder, perfect for chilly evenings when you crave something simple, rustic, and warming. It's a little taste of history in every spoonful, just waiting to cozy up your evening. Chili con carne is one of those timeless dishes that truly delivers, rich, hearty, and with just the right kick of spice. This Tex-Mex staple combines ground beef, kidney beans, tomatoes, and a bold mix of spices like chili powder and cumin. Sometimes a dash of cinnamon or cocoa sneaks in for a little extra depth. Chili has endless interpretations. Some folks swear by a splash of beer, while others keep it strictly bean-free. But however you stir it up, chili con carne is a go-to bowl of warmth for those chilly winter days. Chili even has a colorful history. Back in the 1800s, Texas cattle drivers made chili on the trail, drying out beef and spices into blocks to rehydrate later over campfires. Some say the dish draws from Mexican roots, while others claim it's as American as a cowboy hat. And for a fun bit of trivia, Texas purists stand firm on a no-beans stance, arguing real chili con carne should stick to just meat and spices. Whether you prefer it on the milder side or loaded with spice, classic chili con carne is a crowd favorite that warms you to the core. Pair it with cornbread or some crispy tortilla chips, and you've got yourself a bowl of pure comfort that never gets old. Pork and sauerkraut stew is such a great meal during winter since it consists of succulent pork, pride of sour sauerkraut, and starchy potatoes cooked in a savory and mildly sour soup. It's a Central European comfort food favorite, especially among German and Eastern European communities who believe sauerkraut brings good luck for the new year. This stew is one of the best examples of how sweet and salty interact. Thus, sauerkraut is not only for hot dogs, but also fermented, packed with probiotics, which are beneficial for intestinal health. Fun fact, people used to soak cabbage to ferment so that it can last right through the winter period. If you want to get proper flavors in your pork and sauerkraut stew, try to use pork shoulder or sausage. In some cases, other ingredients such as apples or even beer are put in to tone down the strong tastes and add a sweet accent. Accompany with crusty rye bread for a proper meal that fills your belly and helps to warm you up. Pork and sauerkraut stew is a wintertime dish that is hearty, sour, and somewhat reminiscent of those forgotten dishes that should not be kept forgotten. Chicken stew is a traditional recipe which consists of a thick, creamy chicken stew containing potatoes, carrots, peas, and pieces of chicken. The appeal is elementary, robust, and ideal for lunch or dinner on cold winter days. This is a simple stew that can be prepared with a few ingredients, beginning with the preparation of broth. And let's not forget about dumplings, right? Who can resist soft and tender dumplings which are soaking up that warm stew? This stew is a winter classic that's often found at family dinners, where Grandma used to simmer it on the stove, filling the kitchen with its mouth-watering aroma. Here's a little history fact about this dish. Chicken stew with dumplings got popular especially during the Great Depression, because it was a good way of economizing the little available ingredients when preparing a meal. For it to be even more enjoyable, you can sauté it with some fresh herbs such as thyme or rosemary and a dash of cream for creaminess. Classic chicken stew is a true definition of an old-school meal that resets your mood with every spoonful. Beef barley stew is as old as the day is long and as filling as one meal can get, thanks to a concoction of beef, barley, and carbs like carrots and celery. Barley adds a slight chewy texture to this stew and delicate, slightly earthy flavor. It's one of those stews that tastes like it's been cooking for hours, because it has, with flavors that meld together into pure comfort. Scottish beef barley stew can be traced back into the past when barley was used in dishes meant to fill many, since it was relatively cheap to acquire. Barley is possibly one of the earliest cultivated cereals for over 1,000 years, and people love it in their food and beer. Some tips for this beef barley stew recipe include taking the beef through the browning process for more tenderness. Plus, cooking on low heat creates a very tasty broth. Sprinkle some fresh parsley, and that is all. You can have it with some bread to help mop every drop of the soup off the plate. This beef barley stew is perfect. Warm, filling, and packed with just enough of a hearty punch for a cold winter's night. It's like comfort food for the soul. Hobo stew is a true anything-goes dish, dating back to the Great Depression when folks would gather whatever ingredients they could find to make a meal. Originating from the Hobo people who cooked it over an open fire in a large pot, this stew contains ground beef, potatoes, onions, carrots, and beans, and sometimes canned vegetables. It's a cheap dish where you can put together pretty much anything you have on hand and still have a warm, satisfying meal. Long ago, Hobo stew was a communal event where every member of a group put in what he had on hand to contribute to the pot like a real-life mystery stew. Back in the day, hobos used to mark the houses of kind-hearted people with symbols, letting others know where a good meal could be found. But what makes a good hobo stew today? Use ground beef or sausage as base, and then throw in any vegetable, beans, or canned meat. Gently add a dash of Worcestershire sauce, garlic, and pepper to enhance the taste. Enjoy it with bread, biscuits, or crackers, and you have yourself a simple but hearty meal ideal for the winter. Corn stew, or corn chowder as the Americans like to call it, is a thick soup made with corn, potatoes, and onions simmered in a creamy broth. It's sweet due to the corn, and thick and creamy because it is made with milk or cream. Plus, it's full of chunks of potato. For me, it is a lighter stew, but it still makes the heart warm and soulful, great for nights when no heavy meats are desired. Corn chowder is an older Native American dish which included corn as a central ingredient before European influence with cream and potatoes was incorporated into the dish. And another fun fact, I'm on fire today, chowder originates from the French word chaudière, meaning a cooking pot fisherman used to prepare his fish with whatever was available. For a more local approach, you can tweak it a little with homemade bacon or smoked ham for smokiness, or fresh chives or parsley to zest things up. For an added ingredient, you can incorporate a handful of corn kernels to the mixture before the food is cooked to add on the sweet flavor. Enjoy with oyster crackers or crusty bread, and what you have yourself is a bowl of rich, sweet, and savory soup. Corn stew is easy to prepare, delicious, and it brings out those summer feelings while being eaten on the coldest days. Ham and bean stew is that thick, hearty bowl of, yes, you guessed it, comfort food made to get you through a chilly day. It's packed with smoky ham, creamy beans, and simple vegetables like carrots, onions, and celery. The key ingredient in this recipe is ham bone because it adds such a rich flavor to it, and as it cooks, it releases all its juicy goodness into the broth. Those of you who had some leftover holiday ham will surely appreciate this simple yet delicious stew. Like so many soupy dishes, ham and bean stew has a long history in American food culture, particularly in regions such as the South and Midwest, where any piece of meat was valued. This dish was a popular staple to soldiers of the Civil War because it is cheap, energetically dense, and can be prepared in big quantities. To intensify the taste, you can pour a few tablespoons of apple cider vinegar or some thyme. Take it with cornbread to mop up all the juices, and you've got a homey, warming winter food. Ham and bean stew is the epitome of comfort food, and it's reminiscent of Grandma's kitchen. Turkey and dumpling stew is sort of a post-Christmas dish. Turkey is combined with a creamy, zesty broth and soft, light dumplings, which makes it the ultimate comfort food. It warms you from the top of your head down to your toes. The dumplings are certainly the focus here, and they get transformed into little pouches of deliciousness as they absorb the rich flavors of the broth. This stew was traditionally prepared to help recycle the leftovers from the Thanksgiving dinner, but it's really delicious and shouldn't be prepared only once a year. Dumplings have been around for centuries, appearing in various forms around the world, from Chinese dim sum to Italian gnocchi. In this version, drop biscuit dough is used, creating those light, fluffy dumplings we all know and love. You can also season the broth with more robust flavors, such as using a pinch of sage or thyme to enhance the broth flavor, or adding some colors to your broth by adding peas or carrots. Turkey and dumpling stew is a replenishing and very satisfying meal that covers all the hallmarks of a perfect winter meal. Plus, it's a good way to use up any leftover turkey. Creamed chicken stew with vegetables is one of those comforting dishes that is perfect for the colder months, and this recipe couldn't be easier to make. Packed with tender chicken, carrots, peas, and potatoes, and wrapped in a creamy, luscious broth. This stew makes you feel like you are being hugged with comfort on a cold day. It's simple but full of flavor, and Grandma knew it was perfect for feeding a crowd on a chilly night. This dish has roots in the traditional chicken pot pie filling, but it skips the crust to focus on that creamy goodness. Fun fact: cream-based stews such as this one became popular in America in the early part of the 20th century due to changing availability of dairy products. To make it even richer, you may add a spoon of white wine or manage freshly chopped parsley or dill. Enjoy it with biscuits, and you'll have a truly delicious, warm stew to enjoy whilst curled up by the fire. Creamed chicken stew with vegetables. This is probably a perfect recipe for winter since it will remind you of your childhood. Cabbage roll stew is a variation of the stuffed cabbage rolls, but easier to prepare because it's a one-pot dish. To make it, you take ground beef or pork, rice, tomatoes, and cabbages and cook them in a rich broth that is slightly sour. Cabbage rolls without having to roll a cabbage. In other words, a way to get that yummy, intense flavor with less effort. The preparation of the cabbage rolls is maybe several centuries old, and it is a kitchen staple of the people of southeastern Europe. Fun fact, cabbage rolls were traditionally served at celebrations, symbolizing prosperity and abundance. This stew variation is easier to make, saving you time without sacrificing flavor. Sprinkle a tiny bit of paprika or bay leaf to make it tastier, and serve it with bread to capture all the tomato broth. This cabbage roll stew can warm your bones as no other stew can. Without the complexities of cabbage rolls, it's cozy, filling, and absolutely delicious, a taste of the old world in a modern, lazy day dish. Hungarian goulash, despite its name, is not a soup, but rather a stew with a lot of punch because of its secret ingredient, paprika. This rustic dish combines tender chunks of beef, onions, bell peppers, and potatoes, all cooked in a rich, spiced broth that's as colorful as it is flavorful. Hungarian goulash is thicker than soup but finer than the real stew, hence can be referred to as comfort food, not being too dense but still hearty. This classic dish has been around since the 9th century, originally cooked by Hungarian herdsmen over open fires. Fun fact, real Hungarian goulash mainly uses Hungarian paprika, which provides the dish the smoky sweet flavor and the bright red hue. For it to have that traditional feel, it should be served with either egg noodles or dumplings to accompany the soup. For a richer taste, you could sprinkle caraway seeds or a little sour cream on top. Hungarian goulash is more than just a meal. It's a taste of history, warmth, and old-world charm that's perfect for a cold winter's night. This is definitely a stew that will make you feel like you are in Hungary with every spoonful. Seafood was a popular protein choice, as clam bakes were a go-to dinner food in Connecticut. You could find a good clam bake plate for dinner anywhere from homes to restaurants, diners, and even pubs. Clams were a classic seafood in Connecticut because they were harvested and locally produced. Lamb shank and barley soup is another winter favorite that seems to have disappeared from our modern menus. Think fall-off-the-bone lamb shanks simmered in a flavorful broth with barley, fresh vegetables, and aromatic herbs. Barley added a nutty texture and made the soup even more filling. Sounds pretty good, right? Well, this soup was all the rave back in the day. Also known as the Scotch broth, it originated in Scotland in the early 19th century and made its way around to other countries in Europe. This soup was perfect for cold days as it wasn't only comforting and delicious, but was also packed with nutrients. Since it was light on the pocket, the lamb shank and barley soup were prepared in large batches and enjoyed by families for several days. It had a long shelf life too. What more could anyone want? With the rise of pre-packed and instant soups, this labor-intensive meal has fallen out of flavor. But if you're ever craving this winter meal, there are millions of recipes all over the internet. Meatier dinners were the best option in the 70s as bison steak became popular in Colorado. Bison was one of the most widely hunted animals in the state, with locals having a deep love for the meat. Steaks and American dinners complete each other, so it is no wonder that fresh bison steak with mashed potatoes and asparagus was a fan favorite. Sole meuniere is an exemplary dish that highlights the inherent flavors of its primary ingredient through a simple yet precise preparation method. This dish involves a sole fillet, lightly dusted with flour, then pan-fried in butter to a perfect golden brown. After cooking, the fillet is enhanced with a sauce of the pan's browned butter, fresh lemon juice, and chopped parsley, drizzled over the fish to amplify its delicate, sweet taste. The freshness and quality of the sole are crucial. Ideally, the fish is prepared soon after being caught, underscoring the importance of ingredient freshness in French culinary arts. The preparation focuses on preserving the fish's natural flavors. complemented subtly by the nutty browned butter and the bright lemon juice. Choosing sole, a flatfish valued for its fine texture and mild flavor, is vital as it cooks quickly and uniformly, making sole meuniere a revered dish for its elegant simplicity. Grandma's curried sausages, a nostalgic winter favorite, have largely disappeared from modern dining tables. This dish featured sausages cooked in a mildly spiced curry sauce, often made with onions, apples, and a touch of cream. The combination of savory sausages and the sweet, spicy sauce made it a comforting and flavorful meal. Curried sausages were often served with rice or mashed potatoes, which helped to balance the rich flavors of the sauce. This dish was a staple in many households, particularly during the colder months, providing warmth and nourishment. However, with the rise of new culinary trends and the availability of more diverse meal options, Grandma's curried sausages have become a rarity. Their disappearance marks the loss of a comforting, home-cooked dish that brought families together around the dinner table. Delaware was also serving seafood dinners, as the blue crab boil was a sought-after dinner. Famously covered in Old Bay seasoning, the blue crab boil came with rosemary, sage, pepper, and of course, the freshest crabs in Delaware. People would enjoy corn on the cob, potato wedges, and an assortment of grilled vegetables with the boil. Galantine of chicken is a testament to the elaborate artistry of classical French cuisine, popularized in the 17th century. It involves a meticulous process where a whole chicken is deboned and stuffed with a seasoned mix of ground meat, fats, and spices, including luxurious touches like pistachios and truffles. The chicken is then encased back within its skin, poached in a flavorful stock and set to cool, often in the gelatin-rich cooking liquid, to form a jelly. Decorated with artistic slices of vegetables, herbs, or edible flowers and coated in a glistening aspic, galantine is served cold, making it a striking centerpiece for buffets and banquets. This dish not only showcases the culinary craftsmanship of detailed butchery and seasoning, but also the aesthetic presentation. So high pie is a traditional dish from the 17th century that might sound intimidating, but it's actually delicious and surprisingly easy to make. If you're ever feeling like whipping a fancy meal on a cold snow day, high pie is your best friend. If high pie doesn't ring a bell, you might know it as raised pie. Strike a note? This unique pie was made using a hot water crust pastry, which allowed the pie to be formed by hand into a high, sturdy shape. But here's the twist. Instead of a pastry crust, it's topped with a layer of mashed potatoes. The best part? It can be filled with anything from ground beef and vegetables to braised chicken. High pies were often reserved for special occasions or holidays, as they required significant time and effort to prepare. The hype for high pie has died down over time, but it's still a staple in some homes who can't seem to let it go, especially during the winter months. Coming back to more appealing dishes like the pot roast. The dish was first seen during the Great Depression when economic times were rough. Pot roast made a comeback in the 70s when Idaho took the basic recipe and added proteins like beef or chicken to create a delicious roast. This made for a perfect dinner as it was filling and would often be cooked in a higher quantity. To start off, home-style lamb casserole was a staple back in the day. What's not to love about tender pieces of lamb slow-cooked with root vegetables like carrots, potatoes, and parsnips in a rich, savory broth? Different versions of this casserole were often flavored with a blend of herbs such as rosemary, thyme, and bay leaves. This hot meal was a hit in the 1900s, especially in the colder months. Now, lamb casserole was not just about sustenance, it was about bringing the family together. It wasn't easy to whip up, so you really had to get your hands dirty and put in the work. Parents and grandparents would pass down their secret recipes and techniques, so the aroma of this hot meal never really left our dinner tables during winter holidays like Christmas. Unfortunately, tradition was trumped by convenience, and this lamb casserole has been pushed aside for quicker, less time-consuming options. The chicken and leek casserole is a celebration of classic French comfort food. But don't credit the French for this delicious meal just yet. This casserole is actually a variation of the Scottish cock-a-leekie soup. It's also known as Scotland's national soup. Think of a casserole that combined tender pieces of chicken with the delicate flavor of leeks, all cooked together in a creamy sauce. The original recipe added prunes during cooking, and traditionalists still garnish with a julienne of prunes. Back in the day, it was perfect for feeding big crowds. Plus, a touch of white wine or Dijon mustard makes the creamy sauce 100 times better. It's surprisingly easy to whip up, which makes it a great weeknight dinner option that's sure to become a family favorite again. You can really impress the family table with this unique casserole. Who doesn't want the whole fam to rave about their cooking skills during the holidays? Go earn your points. Now, skirt steak might seem like a grilling cut, but it's incredibly delicious when slow braised. This dish involved slow cooking skirt steak until it became tender and succulent. The steak was typically braised with vegetables like onions, carrots, and celery, along with a rich broth or wine to enhance its flavor. Skirt steak is also traditional in Mexican cuisine, particularly in the north where it is known as arrachera. Braised skirt steak was often served with mashed potatoes or crusty bread to soak up the delicious sauce. This dish was a hit at sophisticated restaurants, but that doesn't mean your grandma couldn't whip it up. They're the best chefs after all. Go dust off some old cookbooks and you'll find a traditional recipe that won't disappoint. It's still a dish that's perfect for a cozy night in, a family gathering, or simply when you crave a warm and comforting meal. Named in honor of the Italian opera singer Luisa Tetrazzini, chicken tetrazzini was reportedly whipped up by chef Ernest Arbogast at the Palace Hotel in San Francisco around the early 1900s. This dish, a testament to American culinary creativity, combines diced chicken and mushrooms with linguine or spaghetti in a sumptuous, creamy sauce that's often elevated with a splash of wine or sherry. Once assembled, it's liberally topped with grated Parmesan and baked until a golden crust forms on top. The addition of sherry or wine doesn't only boost the flavor, it also cuts through the cream's richness with its acidity. Typically, this dish is finished with a sprinkle of parsley or paprika to boost its visual appeal and add layers of subtle flavor. Despite its straightforward ingredients, chicken tetrazzini welcomes variations, such as almonds or pimentos, enhancing both its taste and texture. It's not just a delicious meal, but also a smart way to repurpose leftover chicken or turkey. Now, this might be different from other delicious-sounding dishes that we have talked about, but Kalua pig and tails were quite the dinner in Hawaii. Kalua pig and tails was a slow-cooked pork dish that was prepared in an underground oven that locals call imu. Kalua pig is actually deeply embedded in Hawaiian cuisine and culture, as it is served at local feasts and could easily feed dozens of people. Okay, this one might seem strange to modern plates, but mock turtle soup was once a luxurious and popular dish. It is an English soup that was created in the mid-18th century as an imitation of green turtle soup. It often used brains and organ meats, such as calf's head, to duplicate the texture and flavor of the original turtle meat after the green turtles used to make the original dish were hunted nearly to extinction. Now, before you wrinkle your nose, mock turtle soup was a staple at Victorian dinner tables. The original version is a bit off-putting, but nothing wrong with calf meat, right? In the United States, mock turtle soup eventually became more popular than the original dish and is still popular in Cincinnati. Of course, as turtles became more and more extinct, so did this dish that tried imitating their taste in a soup. But hey, it could be reinterpreted with plant-based alternatives for a delicious and cruelty-free twist on this classic winter soup. Coq au vin stands out as a rich, soul-warming dish that is achieved through a slow cooking process that melds the flavors of chicken and wine thoroughly. Traditionally used to soften tough roosters, modern recipes often utilize chicken, marinated, and then braised in wine, typically red, along with mushrooms, onions, garlic, and a bouquet garni. Initially, the chicken is seared until golden, then simmered slowly with lardons, which infuse a smoky depth. This technique showcases French braising skills, starting with a high sear followed by a gentle, prolonged cooking in a covered pot, allowing the intricate flavors to blend and enhance the meat. The selection of wine is pivotal, forming a flavorful sauce base that deeply seasons the chicken, transforming it into a hearty, deeply satisfying stew that exemplifies rustic yet refined French cooking. Bouillabaisse, a traditional Provençal fish stew, once a winter favorite in coastal regions. This dish, originating from the port city of Marseille, was made using a variety of fish and shellfish, simmered together with tomatoes, garlic, saffron, and other herbs. Stew that was both hearty and nutritious. Bouillabaisse was traditionally prepared by fishermen, using the catch of the day that was too bony or undesirable to sell. It was a way to make use of every part of the catch. The dish was often served with a side of rouille, a garlicky mayonnaise, and crusty bread for dipping. What made a bouillabaisse different from other fish soups is the selection of Provençal herbs and spices in the broth, the use of bony local Mediterranean fish, the way the fish are added one at a time and brought to a boil, and the method of serving. It requires a little more effort than some other options, which is why it isn't a part of our dinner tables anymore. Chimichangas are a deep-fried burrito with lots of peppers to add a pretty heavy kick depending on the sauce. Available easily in most states nowadays, chimichanga actually had their roots in Arizona. Macayo's Mexican Kitchen claims they put chimichangas on their menus first in the 1970s. Since then, the dish has ruled over Arizona as a good dinner food that can be served and enjoyed. New England seafood casserole was a beloved winter dish in coastal communities. Seafood never really falls out of flavor, so this dish used to be a timeless classic. This casserole typically included a mix of shrimp, scallops, and white fish, combined with a creamy sauce made from milk, butter, and flour. It was often topped with breadcrumbs or crushed crackers. Now, traditional New England cuisine is known for a lack of strong spices, so if you've got a knack for spicy food, this might be a little bland for you. But for those of us who like to lay low on the spice, this casserole was a comforting and hearty meal, perfect for cold winter nights. Seafood casseroles aren't everyone's cup of tea, but it's definitely a dish worth trying at least once. Remember the slow cooker oxtail stew Grandma used to make during the holidays? Yeah, it wasn't everyone's cup of tea, but if you love oxtail, this is a winter dish straight out of your dreams. The invention of slow cookers in the 1970s made this dish a global hit, as you could make it without the need for constant attention. The oxtail is a cut of meat that requires longer to cook than you can imagine, and I'm sure you can connect the dots to why this one vanished from our dinner tables. Who has hours to spend on a stew nowadays? Well, if you ever find yourself stuck at home with nothing to do, the slow cooker oxtail stew won't only steal away your boredom, but also satisfy all those meat cravings. You just need the meat and then some vegetables like carrots, potatoes, and celery before cooking it all in a deeply flavored broth. Red wine or tomato-based stew both work wonders. This one will stick to your ribs and keep you warm on a cold winter night. Beef marrow toasts was once a popular winter appetizer, but have become a rare sight on modern menus. This dish involved roasting beef marrow bones until the marrow was soft and spreadable, then serving it on toasted bread. The marrow's rich, buttery flavor, often enhanced with a sprinkle of sea salt and a squeeze of lemon juice, made it a decadent treat. Beef marrow toasts were a way to utilize every part of the animal, reflecting a time when resourcefulness in the kitchen was a necessity. The dish was both luxurious and rustic, providing a rich, satisfying start to a winter meal. However, as dietary preferences have shifted and convenience foods have become more prevalent, beef marrow toasts have fallen out of favor. Their disappearance marks the loss of a culinary tradition that celebrates the full use of an animal and the deep, rich flavors that come from traditional cooking methods. Stone crab claws were also just as special in the East Coast and Florida. Eating stone crab claws was an incredible experience. People would either go fishing on their own during harvest time to find the crabs or watch seafood restaurants bring out fresh crabs. The crab would absorb a lot of flavors and could be cooked in just about any method a person preferred. Now, braised sweetbreads, a once popular winter delicacy, have become a rare sight on modern menus. Sweetbreads, which are the thymus or pancreas glands of young animals, were braised with a variety of ingredients, including onions, garlic, and white wine. The slow cooking process resulted in a tender, flavorful dish that was both rich and satisfying. Sweetbreads have a unique, delicate texture that pairs well with a variety of sauces, from creamy to tangy. This dish was often served with vegetables and potatoes, making it a complete and hearty meal. However, as tastes and dietary preferences have evolved, and with the decline in traditional cooking methods, braised sweetbreads have become less common. Their disappearance marks the loss of a culinary tradition that celebrates the full use of an animal and the complex flavors that come from traditional braising techniques. Crown roast of lamb is an exquisite dish often reserved for special occasions and holiday feasts. This majestic preparation involves arranging racks of lamb into a circular shape that resembles a crown, with ribs pointing skyward. It's seasoned with a mix of rosemary, garlic, and thyme, both in the marinade and as a rub applied before roasting. To enhance its flavor and retain moisture, the crown center is typically filled with a stuffing composed of breadcrumbs, minced garlic, herbs, and occasionally dried fruits like apricots or cranberries. The lamb is roasted until it achieves a tender texture and a beautifully browned exterior. Precision in tying the racks together ensures the roast cooks evenly. To perfect its presentation, chefs often cover the tips of the ribs with foil during roasting to prevent charring. This dish not only dazzles as a culinary delight, but also stands as a festive centerpiece, symbolizing celebration and feasting. Lamb shanks epitomize the rich flavors and tender textures celebrated in Mediterranean and Middle Eastern cuisines. Prized for their gelatin-rich connective tissue, lamb shanks transform through slow cooking into melt-in-your-mouth tenderness. The preparation starts with searing the shanks to a golden brown, locking in flavors through caramelization, then braising them slowly in a mix of wine, stock, and aromatics like onions, carrots, and celery, enhanced with herbs such as rosemary and thyme. This method not only tenderizes the meat, but also infuses it with a robust blend of flavors. Typically, the dish is finished with a sprinkle of gremolata, adding a fresh burst of lemon, garlic, and parsley that cuts through the richness. The braised liquid serves as a deeply flavored sauce, reduced to intensify its taste, complementing the richness of the lamb with a perfect balance of flavors. Pea and ham soup got its name because of how affordable it was. This is probably the cheapest thing on the list to make. Actually, it literally costs just a few cents. All you needed was ham and peas. You'd simmer them in the crock pot with diced ham and some vegetables like potatoes and celery, then slow cook it until the soup got thickened. You'd get this incredibly creamy, lovely soup that was just perfect for winter nights or after a long, exhausting weekend. Maybe you want to ease up on your stomach and eat something healthy for a change, but you still want some familiar flavors to keep you company. A soup like this would be right up your alley. It costs nothing, feels better than most things, and you can make it any time. You could probably even take a nap and wake up to the scent of the soup slowly cooking, becoming the final product. Osso buco is something that's known for smoothness. The way the meat falls off of the bone, the saltiness of the gremolata, the freshness of that first bite, which is an experience that you have to savor all on its own. If you're like one of those people who loves to try out your local Italian-American cuisine, you'd be doing yourself one hell of an injustice by not ever trying this. The way this dish got popular was because while the dish was originally made only with veal, by the time it hit American soil, it was using substitutes like beef or pork shanks. This made the dish accessible for your everyday Joe who can't afford to spend a lot on vegetables because, bills. Plus, if you add some gremolata, which is a mix of lemon zest, garlic, and parsley, to the dish, then you get a pretty balanced set of flavors that bounce off of each other. This is one of the finest parts of Italian-American cuisine, and it got popular for being a wonderful family meal that can keep everyone content and full. Beef bourguignon is a cornerstone from Burgundy, involving marinated and slow-cooked beef chunks, typically tougher cuts like chuck, bathed in red wine, usually Burgundy, to tenderize the meat over several hours. This hearty stew is fortified with onions, garlic, and carrots, and enhanced with sautéed mushrooms and crisp lardons. Historically, this method likely evolved as a means to tenderize and enrich less desirable cuts of meat. The stew develops a rich, deep umami flavor from the Maillard reaction, which occurs as the beef browns, and the complex flavors intensify as the wine slowly melds with the herbs and vegetables. The slow cooking process not only enriches the stew's flavor, but also fills the kitchen with an inviting aromatic warmth, making beef bourguignon synonymous with comforting, rich French culinary tradition. Potato and beef ragout lasagna, a comforting winter dish, has largely vanished from family tables. This unique lasagna variation replaced traditional pasta sheets with thinly sliced potatoes layered with a rich beef ragout and bechamel sauce. The result was a hearty, satisfying meal that combined the flavors of a classic lasagna with the comforting texture of potatoes. The beef ragout, slow-cooked with tomatoes, onions, garlic, and red wine, provided a deep, robust flavor that perfectly complemented the creamy bechamel sauce. This dish was often topped with a layer of melted cheese, adding a golden, bubbly finish. Despite its deliciousness, the time-consuming preparation and the rise of more convenient meal options have led to its decline. The potato and beef ragout lasagna is now a rare treat, remembered fondly by those who enjoyed its comforting, rich flavors on cold winter nights. Fried catfish was a no-brainer for Arkansas because the state is quite literally flooded with catfish. Readily available fish and locals who love fried food led to the creation of fried catfish. A rather interesting way to cook catfish, fried catfish reached the peak of its popularity in the 70s, becoming common at most family dinner tables. Cornish game hen, a petite and elegant poultry choice, typically weighs no more than 2 pounds and is ideal for serving as an individual portion, making it perfect for an upscale dinner. These hens are usually roasted whole, seasoned lightly with herbs like thyme and sage, and basted in butter to achieve a crispy, golden skin while keeping the meat juicy and tender. The cavity may be stuffed with a flavorful blend of breadcrumbs, chopped vegetables, and herbs, enriching the meat during cooking. The cooking process often involves high-temperature roasting to crisp the skin, followed by a resting period before serving to ensure the meat remains moist. Serving Cornish game hens on a bed of wild rice or alongside roasted vegetables allows their delicate flavors to shine, making them a favored choice for intimate dining and special occasions due to their ideal portion size and visually appealing presentation. Classic American dinners often include stews, and Brunswick stew from Georgia was especially popular in the 1970s. In terms of recipe, the stew had many variations from pulled pork to beef or chicken being used along with braised vegetables and Worcestershire sauce. Due to each home customizing the stew, it was bound to be a great hearty dinner. Rabbit stew is a beloved traditional dish in various cultures, renowned for its hearty and comforting nature. This stew typically features tender pieces of rabbit slow-cooked with onions, garlic, and aromatic herbs like rosemary or thyme, which subtly enhance the mild flavor of the rabbit. Additional vegetables such as carrots, celery, and potatoes often join the mix, creating a robust, one-pot meal. The stewing liquid, usually wine or stock, enriches the dish, lending depth and complexity as it simmers. Rabbit meat, known for its leanness and delicacy, benefits greatly from the slow cooking process, becoming incredibly tender and infused with the rich flavors of the broth and vegetables. Rabbit stew is especially appreciated during the colder months or in rural settings where rabbit is a common game meat. Salmon bakes in Alaska go much further back than you would imagine. Introduced in the 1800s, commercial restaurants only started to serve salmon bakes during the 1970s. Chinook salmon was one of the most widely caught fish in Alaska, and so locals created multiple dishes using it. Chicken Marengo holds a storied place in culinary history, famously prepared for Napoleon after the Battle of Marengo. This dish encapsulates the essence of victorious improvisation using local ingredients available at the time. Chicken Marengo starts with chicken pieces sautéed in olive oil, braised with onions, garlic, and tomatoes, enriched by a splash of white wine that deglazes the pan, forming a robust sauce. Later additions often include mushrooms, and traditionally, it was garnished with fried eggs and crayfish, though these are less common today. The slow simmering melds all the flavors beautifully, allowing the tomatoes to break down and create a rich, savory sauce that complements the tender chicken perfectly. This dish exemplifies French provincial cooking, utilizing straightforward techniques and local ingredients to produce a dish rich in history and flavor. Talking about fried food, chicken cacciatore in California is chicken fried in olive oil and then simmered in a sauce of white wine, tomatoes, and herbs. Italian-American restaurants in the state absolutely love having this as either a main course accompanied with garlic bread. The balanced meal of bread, chicken, and tomato soup made for a perfect dinner spread. Beef coconut curry, a flavorful and aromatic dish, has become less common in modern kitchens. This dish combined tender pieces of beef with a rich, creamy coconut milk base, infused with spices like turmeric, coriander, cumin, and chili. The result was a deeply satisfying and warming meal, perfect for cold winter nights. The slow cooking process allowed the beef to become tender and absorb the complex flavors of the spices and coconut milk. Beef coconut curry was often served with rice or naan bread, making it a hearty and complete meal. Despite its delicious flavors, the time and effort required to prepare a homemade curry have contributed to its decline. The rise of ready-made curry sauces and takeout options has also played a role in the disappearance of this traditional dish. For those who remember it, beef coconut curry remains a beloved winter comfort food, evoking memories of family gatherings and home-cooked meals. If this video got you longing for Thanksgiving and Christmas, like, subscribe, and let us know in the comments which stews you'll be making this holiday season.